second session of today's conference that is dedicated for our Women in Leadership Special Interest Group members. We are proud to have Amanda Reynolds join us again today representing the group. She is a member as well and from Blend Coaching Associates Limited. And we've got one half of our chairs of the Women in Leadership Special Interest Group, Claire Moll, Director and Founder of Curve Strategic. Among other roles, Claire, I'll let you introduce yourself in a moment, but I don't want to hold up anybody else's time, so I'm just going to hand straight over to Claire to introduce Amanda and get going with today's session, all about fostering female talent. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Jade. And I'm really, really glad the enthusiasm that Jade brought to this session is absolutely right, because we want this to be a really, really interactive session. Many of you will be familiar with Amanda. She's a great supporter and friend of the Institute, and you'll know that her sessions are interactive. So we really want to bring that energy this afternoon. As Jade said, that I'm the other half of Sue with the co-chair of the Women in Leadership SIG, and we've been really, really excited with how it's developed, which has been wonderful. I'm also founder and director of Curve Strategic, and that's working with organisations focusing on compassionate leadership, emotional intelligence, and supporting organisations in health and social care to move forward. And then in addition to that, I'm currently also supporting Heart of England MenCap as CEO, so keeping lots of fingers in different pies, because as we all know, health and social care is incredibly vibrant, and we all need to be rolling up our sleeves and getting on, which is absolutely perfect way to lead on to Amanda's session this afternoon, which is all about women in leadership and actually looking how we can attract and foster more women in leadership. And be warned, gang, she's going to put some little points there that are going to purposely prompt discussion. So take those points, stick your hand up or go on the screen, and what my job will be in the background watching what's coming through the chat and people. And so if Amanda doesn't notice it, I shall bring that to Amanda's attention. So with no further ado, over to you, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here at your national conference. And I think, as both Claire and Jade have said, I consider myself a real friend of IHSCM. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, your great work, but because my own career has straddled health, civil service, social care and local government. And then for the last 10 years, I've been running my own coaching company. So I've entered the world of founding a company, leading a company, being a female leader of that company and growing that company. We coached more than 800 leaders through the pandemic virtually, health, social care, education leaders. So I think our faculty of 35 plus coaches now, we've got a good idea of some of the challenges. I run the business, so I have a small coaching practice, and that is predominantly supporting women to thrive and to get where they want to get to in their careers and their lives. So I support a lot of senior women. So I've got a bit of an interest in this topic, and I'm not going to share slides, but I am going to hope that you interact with us by entering the chat, putting your hand up, just jumping in, and I'll try and keep it as informal, and I'm happy to be stopped as I go if there's anything that comes up. So actually, it's a really interesting topic, isn't it? The importance of female leadership when we're more than 50% of the population, and we're probably more than 75, 85% of the care workforce. It seems like the law of the obvious that you value women, and you value women at all levels in an organisation, including moving up into leadership roles. And we know women lead in life in all sorts of different ways, in work, in their families, in their communities and their social networks. So that in itself is interesting, that we feel we need to talk about how important this is. And I think we do need to talk about it, because the data, well, it's getting better, but not quick enough. So I'm going to talk about some of the challenges we might face and encourage you to notice where they show up in your experience, in your team, in your role, in your in your career ambitions and in your organisation. And what gets in the way for us? So what gets in the way? A lot of women tell me, I don't want that job. I'm happy to be in this role. I don't want to go into a more senior role. I'll stay here. Thank you very much. So what gets in the way of that? Well, I would suggest there's lots of things at play, almost lots of planets that are not aligning. There's stuff about us. We can be our own worst enemies as women in the workplace, not putting ourselves forward. I've got a great book here, which I will refer to, called How Women Rise. And broadly, the research that says there are 12 habits we need to break. We won't all have those habits, but we will all have some of those habits. And I want to use some anonymised case studies to talk about a leader I worked with where some of those habits showed up and what brought her to coaching. But I've experienced those habits too in my own career. And if I look back, I kick myself for when those habits showed up and I didn't take opportunities. So you might want to interact with me about my own experiences. But they show up in the way others relate to us, and they show up in their mindsets, and they often show up in the way men in the organisation relate to us, and the corporate structures, how they affect us and the wider organisation. And they definitely, what gets in the way is some of how the wider society and families view women and women's roles. So, you know, I want to share some of that. Claire.
Oh, sorry to stop you, sorry, but you did invite us. You did invite us. So I think what would be really interesting, you posed the point about that you haven't always come forward. So because somebody like, the colleagues here probably listen to you and think, yes, but that's all right for you. This is the kind of person you are. So if you're not going to later, would you be able to share some of what were the instrumental things that changed you from being somebody that didn't take opportunities to somebody that not only took opportunities, but now is coaching and leading others in taking opportunities?
Yeah. Good question. So one of the big shifts was a colleague noticed when I was sort of in middle management. Great guy, real ally. We had a coffee together and he said, Amanda, something like, you've got huge potential, but what gets in the way is you keep referring to the team and we. You don't refer to I when you talk about achievements. So I would undersell my achievements because it seemed boastful. It seemed like putting myself in the center stage. But I now know that when I didn't do that, people aren't mind readers, or they might have thought I lacked confidence. So that was a shift for me, from the we and the team did this to the I, and very deliberately trying to change that language. And where I felt, so I said to him, it feels really uncomfortable. So practicing some of that from the team did this to I led a team that achieved this. I recruited this skill set because I knew it was missing in the team. And then I encouraged them to lead that project and I oversaw it. So just subtle changes of language make it leaderly rather than, I'm hiding in the background. So that was one thing. I have also thought at one point in my career, I was in a very senior role in local government, and we were all asked to put ourselves forward for the top job. There were 3 of us as peers, 2 guys and me. And I still don't know why I did it completely. I think I know some of the reason why I did it. But the chief exec wanted to meet us all individually, big local authority, and see if we were expressing an interest. And I said I wasn't expressing an interest because it wasn't the right time in my career. I had a young family. And logically, it wasn't the right time in my career. maybe. But by not putting myself forward, I didn't get considered for other leadership opportunities in that organisation. So with hindsight, I should have put my hat in the ring. My two colleagues did. One of them got the job. Lovely guy. Did a good enough job, but I think probably with hindsight, I could have done a good enough job as well. But what it did was, it made the organisation think that I wasn't ready for a more senior role. So to get a more senior role, I needed to leave the organisation and go elsewhere. So those two things, I think. I hope that's helpful. Jade wants to come in now.
I would like to, please. Yeah, so you just made me think about something that was said this morning by one of the coaches that we had, Sarah Wilson, and she was talking about pressures and pressures that we put on ourselves. And one of the things that she gave as advice was that we need to give ourselves permission, and sometimes we need to seek permission from others. So we need to have that permission to be able to develop ourselves, to advocate for our needs, but also give ourselves permission to access opportunities and access training that's available. Would you have anything else to offer?
So I think one of the things I notice with coaching clients is that predominantly senior women, is that we really want to step up when we're certain it'll work. Guys don't do that. They'll look at a job description and go, I can do 30% of that, I'm going to give it a go. And if they're the only one who shows up, then they might get the job. And you might be really annoyed that actually they went for the job and you didn't offer any competition. I also think we have the tendency to try and be perfect at everything. You know, I call it Polly perfect, Penny perfect, Patsy perfect. It doesn't matter. We have this tendency to need to get everything right, and we are our own worst enemies. So one of my coaching clients is in a very senior work role in the construction industry and is leading the merger of two big firms. And one of these firms is a FTSE 100 company. So it's actually quite a big deal to get this merger right. And they were telling me in their coaching conversation that they had to go into London, and they got on the train with their colleague and they got their coffee and they started to plan their presentation to the board. And she realised that she'd already been up 4 hours. And her colleague, a man, had just talked about setting his alarm to get up, to get to the train station, to get this train. And she suddenly realised she'd been up at least twice as long as him. So I said to her, oh, what were you doing in that time? Were you anxious about travelling? She went, I was making a jam sandwich for my toddler. I've got a dog in the room who doesn't know whether he wants to come or go, so I'm going to just move him out. So hold that thought, jam sandwich for toddler. Because my husband's taking him to nursery, but I know he doesn't really like the breakfast at nursery, so he'll take a jam sandwich and I'll know he's eaten. My 9-year-old has got swimming today, and there's a particular swimming hat he likes, doesn't like, and I put that out on his bed, end of his bed, for when his dad gets him up. It's with all his uniform. And I made my husband a salad because he won't eat. And then I got myself in the shower and literally ran for the train. Okay. She did all of that, and then she ran for the train, and then she worked with a colleague on the day job. And we had a really interesting conversation about why you're doing all of that. And she said, I don't know. I just felt I had to do all of that. And we had a conversation about, if you are in a senior role in construction, leading a big merger, what do you need to stop doing to be great in your job? So we had a discussion about letting stuff go, because when we're penny perfect, We just add stuff on. So we're perfect at making jam sandwiches. We're perfect at getting the school kit ready. We're a perfect partner. We're a perfect daughter. We're a perfect friend. And we try and be perfect at work as well. So, you know, having conversations about, do you have to be perfect at everything, and just give yourself a break, because we have a real tendency to just layer stuff on and not demand enough of others to support us when we are doing really demanding work. I've stunned Jade into silence there, so that, you know, that gives you some examples of.
Can I come in then, Amanda? And please, everyone else do as well. This isn't because honestly, don't leave Jade and I with Amanda on our own, because we'll talk to her all afternoon. But please do share yours. But what I'm really interested in, then moving that on about from the Polly or Penny perfect, the interesting thing was that I've recently just in the process of recruiting for a very senior finance director in the organisation that I'm overseeing at the moment, and a really key part of the strategic leadership team. And yet the thing that really amazed me was on all of the applications, really, really strong, because we needed somebody strong, got in. But when it came to the interviews, there was a clear divide, and it was a gender divide between, and it was fascinating that those males that weren't as well qualified, but they'd met the criteria, really spoke up, really peacocked it, really did very, very well at the interview. And when you're doing a matrix interview, you're kind of thinking, yeah, you answered that really well. Whereas the females were really apologetic. And I had to, it was like pulling teeth. I said, well, would you like to elaborate on that? And because I had their CVs in front of me going, you're not telling me a really, really key bit. And it, to the point that I had to I had a HR manager next to me that looked like, you know, you can't massage it. We've got to base it on what's on there. So what amazes me is that tension with females that I would be really interested, and I'm sure colleagues would as well from their experience, that first of all, there's this whole polyperfect thing going on. And then the other side of that is that when they do say, no, do you know what? I am going to take this opportunity, and they put together a brilliant resume, CV, covering letter. But when you come to the bit, you spend the whole interview apologizing for the fact that you're there and explaining why now you've kind of tentatively gone for this. And so that's a bit you really need to be polyperfect on and really ace and be strong.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things go on there. You know, men have tended to learn right from family and school and early work, college and early workplace, that you've got to hustle it to get on a bit. So you have got to talk yourself up. You've got to present yourself well. You've got to practice your presentation skills. They're likely to be better networked in that way. So they're likely to have access to men who will help them think that through. Whereas women, we tend to not leverage the relationships. We don't hustle. We don't work the networks to get on. We work the networks to get things done, but we don't work the networks to get on. And we think boasting, we've been told to not be boastful, to be a nice, friendly girl. And that's how our whole upbringing has taught us to be nice and friendly and to collaborate and to not be boastful. And we will all have varying degrees of that based on our family experience, our school and our social experience. So they are literally there trying to stop themselves, the little messages in their brain going, don't boast, don't boast, don't boast, don't make it sound too good. Are you really here? Can you really do this? And that is the track that's playing in their head. So when I work with coaching clients, getting them to practice how to present and getting them to practice being boastful, and I'll usually ask them, who is the most boastful leader in your organization? What are those characteristics and why do you dislike them? And they'll describe this sort of monstrous character. And I'll say, what about all the rest? Oh, no, they're not like that. Well, could you be more like the rest? And, get them into that situation where you've got to sell it. You've got to hustle. You've got to sell yourself. This is part of the process, and understanding the scoring, the whole thing about scoring. And you've just got to go in there and you've got to tell them everything and assume they know nothing and sell it. And when you do that, they will often have a different experience of an interview. So getting them to realize it's not boasting, it's sharing your expertise and your readiness for this job.
Well, thank you, Amanda. And I'm really pleased, Paddy, to see that you put your hand up, because this isn't just a sort of a female-centric view. So it's really nice to have a comment or a question from one of the males on the session.
Thanks, Claire. You might regret that. Amanda, so thus far we sort of very much focused on maybe the individual, but my interest is in the organisation. I work for, frankly, an inherently misogynistic organisation. I am in the military. I'm a chief of staff in the Defence Medical Services, and irrespective of my boss, the Director General is female, and my SLT is dominated by female senior officers and senior civil servants. But irrespective of that, what they face, not just on a daily basis, but an hour by hour basis, is a almost systemic built-in misogyny.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. So if my Director General goes to a meeting down in the Department of State or in MOD main building with the senior defence leadership group, it's a room full of men. So the moment she walks in that door, a judgment is made. Yeah. And the fascinating thing I find as well is in our circumstance, for many of us here, it's like a double whammy of misogyny. So you've got the inherent medical misogyny, because medicine is still a misogynistic speciality in many ways, but we have a military misogyny because of the dominance of males, especially in senior positions. Ministerial teams tend to be males, etc., etc. So I'd be fascinating, Amanda, on your thoughts about, so how do you take that on? I frankly get quite tired of hearing, the glass ceiling has been broken, finally been broken because of, this person has been appointed, this person, when in fact, a lot of the time it just seems that actually nothing has changed at all. That when, yes, the individual may have broken that ceiling, however, they're just met with actually a new or say a more strategic level of misogyny than where they were before.
So and thanks for that. It's really helpful. I think you've got to work as an organisation on all these issues at the same time. So admitting your organisation is misogynistic is a great starting point. Most big corporate organisations are misogynistic because they were built out of World War II or military even before, organisations which were full of men. The business schools were built on the back of factory systems post-war, when the women had been running things, but then they went back to the home, men came back, took over. So if you start by saying most of our organisations have been built by men for men, and that culture has been embedded in for centuries, and for the military centuries, then that's what you're working against. So you have to, if you name it, you can then think about the microaggressions that just show up for women at an organisational, team, individual level all the time. You know, I think it was really fascinating that they made a big deal in the media about Rachel Reeves having her ensuite toilet changed because it was a urinal. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I don't think I'd want to go to the loo in a urinal, but it says something about the most senior jobs, doesn't it, in government have gone to guys. And so actually you've got to think about at an organisational level, assume we're misogynistic and that one woman in a meeting is not going to change that. So you've got to work at an organisational level on the microaggressions becoming macroaggressions for women. So, you know, every time a little thing happens, you go in the loo, it's a urinal, I can't go to the loo. That's a massive thing for a woman. It just biologically, I can't do it. I just can't do it. However hard I might try, I can't do it. And there will be lots of examples of that. So almost having a mind to go, send people around your organisation and just get them to jot down in their diary when they encountered things that made it be difficult to be a woman today, and then take that data. You've also got to give women the tough jobs. The reason I mentioned Rachel Reeves is that's a really one of the biggest jobs of state. And actually, we tend to give women the diversity jobs, you know, develop the talent program, deal with the graduates, whatever it is. Why don't we give them a big job? If they're technically good enough to be here and they want that job, give them a big job and then give them the support to be successful at that. So I think it's something about that. It's also, if you think your organisation's misogynistic, and let's say most are, so I'm not picking on the military here, then think about how good are your people managers at managing women and managing diversity. Because if your women are struggling and they are white girls like me, then your women of colour are going to struggle 10 times more than that.
Yeah, of course.
Because actually it just sort of piles up the discrimination. And then how do we create allies? There will be people in your organisation who are better people managers, and they might be women or men. And how do we support them to model the best way of managing everybody? Because if we can deal with the issues that women are facing, it's going to be a better workplace for everybody. So those would be some of the issues. The other one is sexual harassment in the workplace. I wrote a blog about Al-Fayed, but it really, we work with the Ambulance Trust. It could be the Ambulance Trust. There's a report just come out about one of the ambulance trusts where young female paramedics are every day being sexually harassed and spoken to inappropriately by senior men. So it could be any organisation. And how do what are we not doing or continuing to do to enable the cultures where women don't feel safe? Because if they don't feel safe, they won't stretch into something new, a new role, a new responsibility. So all of that. Sam, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I suppose my question point of discussions around nature or nurture. So I feel very lucky that my parents supported me in whatever I wanted to do, regardless of what it was. And so I'm a military veteran. So when I was serving, I became the first female person to be a scuba diving supervisor. So I took military service scuba diving experts all around the world, but I was quite unique, and I was challenged a lot about my qualification to be doing that, although it's a very robust week-long exam process to get that ticket. But once the word got round, so to speak, I was accepted. I was just as good as my male counterparts. But my dad is a retired prison governor, so came from a very male orientated workplace. My mum's a retired nursing sister, but neither of them ever said to me that I can't do it because of my gender.
Yeah.
And it was, if you want to do it, then we will support you to do it. And I think I feel quite privileged that I had that background and upbringing. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about that nature nurture point.
So I think it's much more nurture than it is nature, and you were fortunate to experience an environment where it wasn't about being female, it was about being able, and what are you able to do, what are you interested in doing, how are we going to support you to get there. I think that the younger generations, Gen Z, Gen X, are much more challenging about corporate organizations now and what they won't put up with than maybe our generation did. So I wonder if it was great you had that upbringing, but it was probably more unusual than a lot of your peers. What I heard you describe is doing a tough job as well. And once you were given the tough job, because you were technically trained for it, you shatter perceptions in organizations by women being as good as the guys. You know, it's like sport, isn't it? You know, there was this perception amongst sports agents and broadcasting companies that people wouldn't watch female sport. So that's why they didn't fund female sport. But actually, we've shown that that was a myth. People will watch female sport and get really excited about female sport as much because they're elite athletes, aren't they? We're watching elite athletes perform for our team or our country. And we get really excited about that. But it actually took women's soccer, as they called it, women's football, to go to America to then come back almost. You know, it had to go somewhere else to be taken seriously to come back. But it is something about not just breaking the ceiling up there, breaking the assumption ceilings across the organizations and challenging the assumptions about what women want to do, what women can do, and what women can be trained to do. So the other thing is organizations need to think about, have we got development programs for women? Not talking shops, but how do we get women ready to do these jobs? You know, almost like, what can we learn from NASA? Because female astronauts go up in space as much as the guys. So what, you know, where can we learn from organizations that are really good at this? How do they support women's development of technical skills and leadership skills to progress? So yeah, thanks for that. If we look at the data, McKinsey have just done their 2024 10-year report in women in the workplace, and it says we're doing better, but it's going to take about 50 years. You know, I'm 57. I can't wait that long. You know, my grandmother lived till she was 92, and she was a vibrant, active 92-year-old. So if I do that, I'm still not around long enough. So it's like, we can't wait that long for it to just make real progress, because it's fragile. Yes, there are more women in senior roles, but it's fragile because, as you said, Paddy, one woman, all guys. And, you know, if the organisation is not giving off supportive vibes to senior women in leadership, they're going to struggle to last. And we've got a pipeline problem, because then women look up and go, doesn't really support my development, doesn't support me to be effective. Why do I want to take that on? So, you know, you've got all of these things playing out in the workplace. And then we also know from the data that as women, if we choose to have children, we're tending to choose to have them later in life. And then we're caught in that looking after mum, looking after dad, looking after partner, looking after neighbours while our kids still need us. And so women end up making choices that I can't do everything, so I'm not going to try and do everything, and ending up taking, we think women carry 25% more emotional load into senior roles, leadership roles, than their male equivalents do. you know, and that story about the jam sandwich and the swimming kit, classic example, already done that. And now I've got to do the day job. So, you know, we avoid going for senior roles because we're too responsible for too much already, and the organisation won't support us to be effective.
Amanda, I'm conscious, sorry, just in that we're sort of heading towards, and these sessions always can to the last sort of 5 minutes or so. As we go, I don't know whether anybody has any particular questions for Amanda about, so what are we going to take away from here then? What do we need to, what is going to be our takeaway from here that you're all going to, your bit of sage advice? What you've given us so far is wonderful. And I mean, my quote of the day is, we need to learn from NASA, which I think is always a good rule of thumb. Paddy, you've got your hand up. So I just think, you know, as we head off after this session, I want to keep the momentum going beyond this session.
And I just wanted to rattle off the sort of 12 habits that we'll all have some of, just to help people think about that. Paddy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to add and pop in there that it's, so the numbers, I suppose the ratio and breakdown in that sense is one thing. But let's not kid ourselves in ways that, because sometimes this is so deep rooted in many institutions. And I'll give you an example where, so I've had to clear out my headquarters building because of a refurbishment of the heating system and that kind of thing. Big open plan office and all that kind of thing. So at 53 years of age, I suddenly discover that things like the design of ventilations and heating systems are all about men.
Yeah.
So in most of the offices and buildings we occupy, stand fast the allocation of gender-specific toileting. The rest of it's all about men. And there's been some incredible work done recently, in particular around the menopause and how you have to adjust ventilation systems, heating systems, and everything else. So silly me decides to address this with the contractor and say, okay, how do I factor this into this new system you're fitting for me? They just look blank me. Are you stupid or something? No, I'm being serious. I want this factored into the programming of the system. Sorry, we don't know how to do that. So, you know, these things are hiding in places.
Yeah.
These issues are hiding in places that most institutions probably don't, you know, realize or recognize.
And I think that whole life changes and still be ambitious, because you don't lose your ambition just because you're having hot flushes at 4 a.m. or struggling with the temperature in the office. How we keep women on side is really problematic. So you've got a whole sort of construction industry, design profiles, building regs that are male centric, haven't you, that are then brought to bear. So they'll follow the rules and miss the point. There are so many examples. I just wanted to touch on, that's one of them. So bear in mind, and there's a great book called Invisible Women that talks about this in length, amazing book. But just bear in mind that once men are 25, their body's pretty set. So all the women in your workforce, it's not like that. They're going through periods of fertility or not. They're making choices about children or not. They are struggling to get pregnant or not. They're coming back from maternity leave. They're making huge adjustments. It's affecting everything. Then they're in the midlife career. They might have teenagers, young adults in transition. They are probably going to be more sighted on that than their partner is, if their partner's a man. They're then going through the menopause and got aging parents. So a couple of things I wanted to pick out here. I wanted to talk about Angela Merkel. Point 9, we have a real tendency to minimize ourselves and make ourselves small because we are outnumbered in male groups. If anyone can remember when Angela Merkel was running Germany and Trump was president, I want to say was, but I'll start to hyperventilate if I think might be again. When Trump was president, they had a G6, G7, G12, whatever. And Angela Merkel, the men were sitting down and she stood in front of the men and leant over the desk and gave them eye contact. And that was quite a striking image because she didn't make herself small and she was on the same height as the men, because we tend to be smaller than the guys. We tend to sit at the back. They tend to spread out. So if you're in meetings as a woman or there are women around you, notice if they're making themselves small or the dynamic of the group makes them small, gives them a smaller chair, they sit at the back, whatever, and think about how you can be bigger yourself as a woman and how you can create that take up as much space as the guys. Don't minimize yourself. Don't avoid your emotions. We spend a lot of time holding it in. Don't just have a rage in the meeting, but notice what this workplace is making me feel. Feel it, notice it, reflect on it, and use that. It's data. So you can use that. You can work with a coach on it. You can think about it with your colleagues. Because if you avoid those emotions, you're shutting down some of the really helpful feedback on the organization. Think about power being fourfold. So it's technical power, but don't overuse it. If you want to get into a senior role, it's not about being technically brilliant. It's about being leaderly brilliant. So think about connection power. Men are better at this than women in organizations. So make the powerful connections, the allyships. Think about charisma and gravitas. How am I coming into this room? How are you going to notice me? I don't know whether the media is true, but there's a suggestion that the only leader Putin was scared of was Angela Merkel. So she was obviously getting something right. I'd quite like to scare him. I'd quite like him to be scared of us. And then there's positional power. So don't avoid getting in the big roles, because if you get in the big roles, you've got a chance to set the culture and shape the culture and change the culture. And we're out of time, aren't we?
That's absolutely perfect way to end it. Thank you so much, Amanda. I know that Jade will also advise it. If anybody wants to keep the momentum of these conversations going, then do, continue throughout the conference to put things in the chat. As, like I say, co-chair of the Women in Leadership SIG, we're really, really keen that in the sessions that we run in between these conferences and events that are very, very regular, we address these things. So if you haven't had an opportunity to discuss anything today that you really wanted to, just contact Jade, and we're in frequent communication with Amanda. So that's absolutely, absolutely wonderful.
I put my WhatsApp number and my email in there as well, so you can get me directly, or I'm quite busy on LinkedIn, so you can get me there. And I'll hang around here if it's not going to disrupt your conference, if people want to hang around here for a couple of minutes and have a sort of one-to-one or a smaller group chat with me on anything.
Bless you. Wonderful. Jade, final words?
I'd just like to extend my thanks to Amanda for joining us for today's conference. Thank you to Claire for hosting this session. If you would like to get involved in the Women in Leadership Special Interest Group, I've popped in my colleague Charlotte's email address in the chat box. We will get in touch after the conference with all of the contact information for all speakers, groups, etc. But if you need access to them today, they're there in the chat function. I'm going to turn the recording off for now because we've got a short break before our final session of the day, and it'll give you the opportunity to speak to Amanda in private if you'd like to. Thank you all so much.
Thanks everyone for coming.